Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Ilevel Instructor presentation. Today, we're going to talk about a new tool that we have. But first, we wanted to introduce you to something that you're probably all familiar with. And with me today, we have quite a few of our guildies. We have Ranhar, we have Nada Lemur, we have Shemai, and we have Cam as well, and we also have Trish. Also better known as Cloud to everybody. And so we're going ahead and we're going to talk a little bit about, Recount and sort of what we're used to seeing with this tool here.
With this is one of our sort of feedback and tools that we use in game. And essentially what it does is it tracks for us certain key metrics, if you want to put it that way. And for example, what we're looking at right now is a recount log of one of our last fights, looking at damage done. And the nifty thing about recount, of course, is that it allows you to take a look and see how we kind of performed, right? How we stacked up in various on various facets. In this case, DPS or damage done, and gives you basically a look at, well, what was the total damage done in percentages, and it essentially allows you to see how everyone stacked up and get a gauge of how much throughput for the entire team on that metric was done. And of course, you can flip through the various pages in Recount and see, heals, total healing done, damage taken, et cetera, and that's basically Recount in a nutshell. It gives us a read after, sort of an after action read of how we did on these various performance metrics. And what we're going to be looking at today, and Chris, I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add about Recount, but what we'll look at today is comparing Recount and this new tool from Ask Mr. Robot called the Combat Logs.
Exactly, and so really what we're looking at is this is what everyone's used to. It's that column table. It's so exciting, isn't it? You look at it and you go, yeah, percentages. And so the difference is that you actually have, infographics now coming to you from the fine folks at Ask Mr. Robot. And really what they are looking at is they are going ahead and pulling the combat logs. This is something not new. A lot of other sites do it, like World of Logs, like some of the other sites you see, like Guildox and some other things like that. They use it for different reasons, but like World of Logs is just logging all your combat logs. What Mr. Robot has done is they've gone ahead and put some graphical interfaces in it, and you can see here on Ranhar's share, you can see how he's bouncing around the different icons that are out there. So they have a lot of different things to look at. How do you go ahead and pull up and evaluate your performance? Because quite frankly, with Recount, it's kind of hard to see benchmarking wise because you don't have a benchmark. There's not a comparison against averages. I mean, you can go out and look at top kills, you can go out and look at top ranked DPS and compare yourself to that, but really for tanks and healers there really hasn't been a metric that's there for you to actually go ahead and play with. And that's one of the really exciting things about this. And so basically what you do is just simply go to askmrrobot.com. And what you can see here is that you have the normal screen, the load your character, combat, but now you see combat infographics. It also has their normal bag sorter for you to let you know. And when you click on combat infographics, what you get is you get this website. I'm going to try to scroll all the way back to the top. And this is their blog. So I don't know if you guys have ever visited this or not. This is really sort of talk about sort of the why behind all the stuff that's there. And really their goal is to simply try to make it easier for people to see how they perform. And so they have a really nice setup here. So all you do is just click on the infographics. There's a nice little quick video that sort of walks you through how to read the stats and sort of look at what does it mean. And then you also have different pieces here that they break out. So you can see like avoidable damage, which is something that Recount really doesn't give you a good look at. You also can see a variety of different pieces that are out there, like basically DPS on ads or how fast you're transitioning down things. Like this example here is on Bracken Spore, and for those of you that have done Bracken Spore, you guys remember the mine fungus? So basically here they give an evaluation of themselves. So this raid did it in 9.2 seconds. The upper 97th percentile of raiders did it in 4.9. So you can see things die really fast at other groups. So it gives you a way to look and see your performance. So how do you do this? Well, luckily they have this little upload in your logs. What you need to do is you need to download, go to curse.com or whatever your WoW add-on site is, and look for the Ask Mr. Robot add-on. And you need to have that. And then the next thing you need to do is you need to go ahead and download the desktop app on here, so that'll interface it. So what the desktop app does is after you're done raiding, somebody in your party that has Ask Mr. Robot on has to click Save Character Data. And what that does, well, obviously you have to start recording your log. That's also through the little piece that's in the game itself. And what you need to do is go ahead and simply start that up. So I'm going to switch screens here real quick so you guys can see that. So this is what Ask Mr. Robot looks like. It looks like two little beady eyes appearing at you. If you click on that, some of you may get familiar from this piece from whenever we had issues with the logs not necessarily transferring fast to Ask Mr. Robot. So we had to move this over to get our reforges and everything like sort of peaked out. But if you click on combat logs, you have the ability to start logging. You can always log High Mall or Blackrock Foundry. Obviously, as more raids come out, these will be updated. You can also choose to wipe data. So you go, oh yeah, we're going to die on purpose, so let's ignore this. You can click this button here. But at the end, you simply just say, once you're done with your fights, once you're done with the raid, what you do is you go ahead and you click Save Character Data. And what that'll do is that'll save a log in your files for World of Warcraft. And then what happens is you would then go to the desktop app and open it up, and then that's how you upload the character log all the way up to Ask Mr. Robot. So it's pretty quick, pretty easy. They have some helps here to sort of help you figure this out. So they do a nice job. You can export your character there as well, and they can go ahead and pull if you're seeing that you're ever having a downtime between what you see on Ask Mr. Robot and what World of Warcraft is showing you. So those are things that you're always going to go ahead and play around with and can't necessarily get around. But that's something to think about whenever you are looking at these infographics. This is where they're pulling that data from. All those data that you see in Recount and everything else, and obviously much, much more, is from this piece. So they also have Blackrock Foundry, so they're showing some different infographics from Gruul here. So it's kind of interesting that they write a nice little story here about how they went in with their group. Their average group item level for their entire group was 666. And they found out that after running their apps, this is Ask Mr. Robot, that of all the people who had that item level, of all the raids, 97% of all attempts at people with that item level resulted in wipes. So that's where they start getting a feel for what's going on. So let's take a closer look at it. So all you do is you click Load Your Character, you pick your server, and you'll go ahead and pick your tune. So I went ahead and picked Kwapi, who's my tank. And basically this is what you'll see. So you'll have your information here, and you'll have combat logs. So here's what has to happen for you to get a combat log. Either you have to have the app and have saved the log and uploaded it, or what you'll have to do is you'll have someone in your party will have done this and saved it and uploaded it. So that means if you ever go into a pug group, anybody you're in there with a pug group who happens to have this add-on will record your data as well, and it'll go on for the entire sequence of bosses that pug group runs with. With the guild, it'll do the same thing. So everybody who's in there, even if you're in there for just one boss, the combat log will show up for the entire duration of the raid, that the raid lasted, at least for the person who had the add-on, stayed in the raid. And so if you got in a group, and like we got in a raid group, and we went all the way through High Mall, but you dropped out after Brackenspore, you would still see Imperator here, but when you click on it, your name would not show up in any of the logs, except for the bosses that you were present on. So let's go ahead and take a look at what these infographics look like. So all you need to do is you pick one you like. So we'll go ahead and pick January 29th. It's not up to date. And you can either choose to look for data. So we'll go ahead and just sort of pull data so you can see what that looks like. And you can say, oh, hey, look, it looks a lot like Recount, but with graphics. So you can see what's going on here. You can see total DPS. The interesting thing about this is you can actually With Kargath, there is no phasing to it, so there's no big difference there. But you can do the healing as well. And feel free to jump in. And there's buffs.
Well, I wanted to point out something too, because I know and this is kind of skipping a little bit because we're kind of moving towards looking at the infographics, and the infographics are actually the newest facet of this combat log tool that was just released. The data pages that the copy's showing right now are actually the first things that came out very recently with the infographics, and soon they'll have the comparison end of the tool ready to go. But there is something I want to point out about the data. This set, this module that we're looking at right now, and I'll display on my feed something that I think is really helpful, or that I found helpful. What I did was pull up the last Brackenspore fight that the R&D group went at least the one I was present at, to kind of take a look and just kind of review my own performance and try to get a better sense of the fight. And one of the nice things about the data interface for the module that is different from Recount is that instead of just a table, it does also allow you to look at it. So if you go over to the little squiggle here, it'll give you the fight at a glance. So here's a timetable from start to end of the fight, right? And you can change certain variables here. So right now, I can switch to looking at, okay, all players, and what I'm interested, so I'm looking at this as a healer. From a damage standpoint, I'm more interested in, damage taken by the group, and I can switch to, and Brackenspore does have different phases, and I'm kind of interested in, okay, well, where are the spikes in damage happening as a healer? And as I'm looking at this, what it's going to do, if I switch to phases, so all phases looks like this. If I go to the normal phase, it'll mark out the normal phases. And then if I go to infesting spores, it'll mark off infesting, those segments. Now what's really interesting to note about this is that a lot of the damage taken is associated in and around the spores, right? The spore phases. And when you look at the tanks, but you can also go in here and kind of graphic not just the tanks, but the rest of the party as well, right? And see where the damage was happening there. If I then take that knowledge and I go look at healing, right, I can look at this from the graph with the spore phases happening and seeing where our rate healing was hitting, right? Which for me, as I'm kind of processing this, it's like, okay, well, we're seeing the most damage spikes in and around the infesting spores phases, but we don't seem to be really good about hitting. Right, it's sort of after the fact, so we're lagging. We anticipated once, and the rest of the time we were, kind of lagging the damage. So that's something that's interesting, and it told me, what suggested to me is that, I certainly should pay more attention to when those spikes are coming, and maybe start to do some mitigation as it hits, and not not kind of trailing once the damage is being done. Now the other thing that's really kind of nice, and again, there's a lot of things to play with in here, but you can also look at, so here's the table again, very, very familiar, but if you kind of click in there, it'll give a per person performance, right? So you can take a look for yourself and say, okay, well, during that fight, what was my best throughput coming from, right? So, as a healer, I've got this notion in my mind based on experience, okay, well, here's my rotation for this fight. I want to use Healing Rain for a certain reason. And I'm thinking, well, I should get my most throughput from this and this and this. Well, this gives you a chance to actually see in more fine-grained detail. Did your expectations line up, right? Were you doing what you thought you were doing in your rotation, or are you surprised by certain other things, certain other spells or moves that were giving you a lot more performance than you anticipated, right? So I mean, just as you're staring at this, you get a chance to kind of go through and play with it. I think you'll get a lot better sense of what you can take away as far as analysis. I really love this this fight over time graph, especially if you're looking at it from a personal level. It'll show you, if you're a caster, how your mana. So if you check off the mana box, it'll tell you how your mana looked in terms of mana burn. You can also take a look at the effects of various buffs that you might trigger, right, during the fight, and see, okay, well, what did I have going, and I'll pick a spell. So, for example, Flame Shock. My thought is usually during a fight I want to have Flame Shock going a lot. Well, I don't have it going very much, not as much as I want. Right? So that immediately told me, okay, well, I'm not concentrating on that as much as I thought I was.
Mm-hmm.
How about Riptide? Okay, Riptide, I'm doing a lot better with Riptide, right? Especially as a healer. But there are some points early on where I could do a little bit better, maybe later on too. So again, I mean, just to give you some examples of after staring at and playing with this, kind of the things that are coming out at me in terms of what it's allowing me to analyze and get a sense of as far as the far as a particular encounter and kind of performance, personal performance during it.
Exactly, and that's one of the nice things about this tool is that you can see a lot of different things from it. So as Jerry showed you, that's the data side. You can go ahead and pull a lot of that from each piece here. So you can see healing, you see buffs, that we didn't die any, but yeah, you just toggle between the bar and the squiggle line. You can also pick, as Shemai said, you also pick different targets. So for instance, for me, I go up into the sands a lot, and I can go ahead and you can see the damage on whenever we fight the Bilge Slingers. And this is when they first come out, so you can see we did a good job there. You can pick different pieces. You can say who is the top DPS on them. You can play around with that as you want, and of course, custom gives you lots of different pieces to play with. So that's one thing to look for. And again, it's a different way to look at your data. The infographic is really, I think, what we're all here for. Mm-hmm. So here's the interesting thing about this, is that the way to look at it is when you first go to the infographic, it's going to ask you to pick your boss. So let's click on all bosses, and we'll start off there. So first of all, they give you a look. And now this is something you'll see. So see on the right-hand side, everything's out of 10. So our raid scored a 6.0 or a 6.3 out of 10 on these two bosses. Anything that you see on the left-hand side will only show up if you actually have your own for your data or for whatever player you choose. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and pick me. So there. So I did about average on Kargath and did 8.4 on the Butcher. So this is what you'll see. So the individual's rating is over here on the left, and the overall rating is over here on the right. So that's just really sort of a quick thing to look at here. Now, one of the problems you run into is that once you select a character, you really can't move off that. They don't have ability to let you deselect your character. So what you have to do is basically just go back, and then you can go ahead and start off where you wanted to go. Now, we can start looking at Kargath. So once you pick a boss, these are the main categories. So DPS, potion use, avoidable damage, berserker rush, impale, and chain hurl. So these are all mechanics of the Kargath fight that you have, other than DPS and potion use, obviously. But basically, it gives you a setup. So you have things that blow up, and then you can see what's going on. So for our raid, we had an average item level of 653. The recommended item level for this fight is 636. So we're 3%. We should have a 3% wipe rate given our item level. So it gives you some basics that are there. Basically, what you have here is 5 is the medium. We scored a 6. You can see here the individual breakout of how our group performed. We did really good on the potion use. We did good on the chain hurl. We did good on the avoidable damage. We did good on the berserker rush, but not as good as we did on avoidable damage. Our heals per second was good. Impale is how well the tanks were able to mitigate the impale ticks, as well as how well the healers were able to shield from those as well. DPS performance and heal regen, that's from the tanks regenerating their own healers. So there's lots of different things to play around with. So how much damage did we do? So the average raid DPS, they talk about the top 5. They give you a list there. 50% is the medium. We already know that our DPS is a little low. And then it sort of gives you benchmarks to see where the raid DPS should be at, depending on what percentile. Now, these are percentiles, so the bigger the percentile, the better you are. So what it means is the top 5% of the raid groups that did Kargath, this is the DPS they pulled. Then again, the caveat there is the top 5% of the raid groups that used Ask Mr. Robot's app. So there's always that. And then they look at your gear, and again, this is based off of a comparison to everybody else. So it could be skewed just because they do have a smaller pool. You do see some pieces here that looks at different metrics that are here. They have the DPS, they have the potion use. Who pre-potted, who didn't pre-pot, who didn't pre-pot, who used potions during the fights that were there. How well we did on avoidable damage. So overall, you can see that we did pretty good. We got avoiding flame jets. We got 7.5. 8. This is the little green splashes on the ground. We were good at avoiding that. The fire bombs. These are thrown by the iron bombers. So it's kind of hard to avoid that. That's maybe it's avoidable, maybe it's not. Fire bombs there. Berserker rush. That meant that someone stood in front of the berserker rush. And then of course Maul is no one got in the Maul, so that's great. What Maul is whenever you fall down into the tiger pit. So hopefully we don't do any of those. Berserker Rush, we did pretty good on that, avoiding that. Impale, this is what you have. You can see right here, Kotoshiki did a much better job than I did when it came to mitigating those ticks. And so that's something that I know that for me, my own personal performance, I'll need to get better at. But Konoshiki's doing a pretty good job. And Chain Hurl, again, these are the only people who are going up in the crowd. And it shows, how successful are we at getting down the ads, the specific ads. So here we killed 17. We saw 17. We killed 13. We saw 3 build slingers. We killed 3. And I can say for us, the reason why we didn't kill all 17 is because we didn't go up the last time. We immediately hopped down to kill Kargath faster. So you do have to take these with a grain of salt. And understand what you're doing, and understand what your role is. So an example I'm going to use is I'm going to go ahead and look at Kuwapi and give you guys an example of this. So with Kuwapi, in this group, really how Kuwapi sets himself up as is I'm actually building myself up to do more DPS output than I am mitigation, and I'm doing that to help out our group with the overall DPS generation. And so for me, what we're looking at here is you're looking at how well you're generating your healing. So average healing required per second for tank spec played in this raid. So when it comes to this, this example, look, healers, I'm actually the squishy one.
Mm-hmm.
This example. So I mean, that's the thing about it, is Kotoshiki did a really good job of using your shields, and that's what it comes down to, is looking at. So this is something that, as a tank, I can improve on. So I see that I got a 3.4 score out of 10. So that means I need to be using my shielding more, or I need to focus more on you're really doing that more absorption and doing more shielding and things, as opposed to trying to maximize my DPS output as a tank. And so those are some things that we're making caveats for when it comes to the raid makeup. And this is why our strategies are a little different than what you see everyone else using. So avoidable damage, I did a good job there. We got 8.5 out of there. So flame jet, you can see not too many people got hit with that. Again, you can see your comparison there. Berserker rush with impale. Looking at impale again, Kotoshiki did a much better job on impale. I only got 2.6 ticks, where she was getting almost double that. So that's another area of improvement for me. So this is sort of how I would look at this information that's there. Chain hurl, we're doing really good. We really can improve on this 8.2 because, like I said, we decided as a group that once he's less than 10%, the gallery group will just simply hop down and continue on with killing Kargath. So we won't get a perfect 10 out of that, unless we pick up our pace and kill him before the chain hurl happens. But so those are things that you can see. So we can look here and see, how well did we play. So again, this is Kuwapi's score. It's 5.0. The raid did 6.0. I'm looking at Kuwapi's score here. I did really good at avoiding damage and the Berserker Rush, which is actually really easy to do when you're in the stands. And then again, I can work better on making it easier for my healers and doing a better job of trying to mitigate damage more. So there's some different areas that are there. Looking at what's going on here, Mine was a little higher, as we already showed you. The raid average was 19. I needed 20. So that's what you're seeing there. Is it good based on my gear? So I only did 22, but overall we only did 26. So there's some different pieces there that we're looking at playing around. So this is different areas that I can improve on for myself. And so this one here is really basically what they're saying is that if I really focused on doing nothing but mitigation as a tank, then I would only need 12,000, like 12,500 heals per second to be in the upper 5th percentile. So that's sort of what they're looking at there. Potion use is potion use. It's pretty explanatory. But DPS can do the same thing. So when you're looking at this, just take it all with a grain of salt. Again, remember, we don't necessarily have a full set of data to play with, but it is an interesting way to give you a look at what's going on, and it gives you a look at how we're doing as a group. You can look at Butcher real quick. And you can see we did 6.3, so there's a lot of different pieces that we can look at. But you can see the categories are the same. No matter what boss fight you have, there'll be some different pieces when it comes to phases of fights, but there's a lot of different ways you can go ahead and evaluate these infographics. But the biggest thing is we want to make sure you guys all got to look at seeing what was there. It looks like we did have a question about setting it up. I will say that this is geared for Highmall and Blackrock Foundry, so it also includes LFRs. So you'll still see if you have this add-on and you start it in LFRs, you will grab LFR data, which we all know is not really useful. But it gives you some things to look at when it comes to comparison. There's always good to have comparison. So the really nice thing about this, it gives you guys benchmarks. So does anyone have any comments?
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about in the past, when we talked about kind of working up your skill and kind of learning and learning within the group. So one of the things that's pretty, I think, a common experience for a lot of us that pay attention to this and are working on this, is that you take a look around and you see what other folks are doing, how they're performing, right? So I'll compare myself to other healers in my class, with my class and my particular spec. So a lot of times, for example, if we go in, Ranhar and I are both Resto Shami healers when we do, a lot of times when we do the R&D runs. So, not infrequently I'll take a look and see, okay, well, how did we do relative to one another in terms of healing through a particular fight, and keeping in mind, well, what are the roles that we agreed upon? Are we tank healing or raid healing? But one of the things I'm looking at is kind of looking at, again, my rotation and what that put out there in terms of performance, and then comparing what Ranhar did, right? And saying, okay, well, does this kind of make sense? Are there any surprises here? Especially any areas where Ranhar seems to have really kind of stood out? And then trying to figure out from the data that's presented there, okay, well, how did that happen, right? Did he end up popping that during, Bloodlust, or did he have Ascension going? So you can, in the same way that you can kind of bring yourself up and say, okay, well, let me put these variables in place and see what kind of picture this paints for me. About, okay, well, here's what happened during the Bloodlust. Here's what I had going. Did I have Ascension or not? Did Ranhar have Ascension or not? And does that explain the difference in the throughput for this particular spell or this particular bit of performance? So there's a lot of things in there from that angle too. If you're talking about taking a look and using the benchmarks, you can do comparisons. It's not as easy as I hope it might be later when they get the comparison module done. I'm not quite clear what that's supposed to look like, but there's enough there in place already where you can kind of compare and contrast, with a fellow guildie, or if you can even look up a one of the top players on the server for your class. If they happen to be running this and have public data out there, you can pull up their information and take a look at the same fight, right? See how they're spec'd, see how they're glyphed and things like that, and just kind of study kind of how their throughput or performance went. And I think that can give you a lot, if you stare at it for a while to try to make sense of it. There's some ideas that it can kind of give you in terms of how things, how you might improve your own rotation or things you might try.
Well, exactly. And I did see there was a question in the community asking, is this available for the free version or does it have to be a paid version? Right now, this is available for the free version.
Mm-hmm.
Now, who knows how long it'll be available for the free version? I'm sure that it is. Eventually they'll probably look to commercialize it. But right now, it's definitely use it while you can. Take a look at it. Again, we don't know the sample size of the data, so it's still sort of in that beta testing phase. It seems like, but it does seeming like the infographics and the data are moving more towards the completed products phase, and definitely the comparisons are still under review and under being built. So, but yeah, exactly. That's really what this is. This is just sort of giving you benchmarks, and that's something that the R&D group has talked a little bit about. Is how are we setting ourselves benchmarks to see what it's doing? Because like almost everything here you see in a game like World of Warcraft is a continuous improvement type process. It's something that you're always seeking to improve your performance and being really good at it. And one of the nice things about this is that it does give you something to shoot for and something to strive for. And it gives you that point of reference.
Well, I wanted to say that for me, I'm a very visual learner, and so when I look at Recount a lot, I don't really get all the numbers, even though it can be explained to me many times. If you're not a numbers person, sometimes it's hard to get numbers, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at this, and the fact that it's an infographic and it's very visual, and there's pies and wedges and lines to where it's kind of it's a little bit more of a gauge of different levels than Recount is.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier for me to take in. And you talk about your comparisons and the way that it's set up, it gives me a little bit better idea of how to gauge myself rather than just staring at numbers.
Mm-hmm.
and not really knowing, not really being able to grasp the number aspect very well. This is one of my weaker points because I'm just not a stats numbers person, and so sometimes I have a hard time measuring myself.
Well, even if you are, I think even if you are a stats numbers person, having the additional context laid out so easily that way makes the job or the challenge of making sense of it that much easier. You know? And that's the piece I agree. That's the piece that, as good as Recount has been, it's sort of two-dimensional or sort of flat. It's just, okay, well, here's a snapshot at the end of the aggregate numbers. Here's the total throughput of everything. But what we're missing is, slicing that up. It's like over the course of an encounter, how was that doled out, right? How's the damage doled out? How's the healing doled out? How did I dole it out, right? In terms of my role.
Well, it's like, if you look at Recount, I know that I'm not one of the stronger healers, but what it is like you showed over the fight, you can see how your healing was against everyone else's, and when you might have been spiking, they might have been down, or it gives you a better visual feel for, like you were saying, I thought I was using this, but obviously I wasn't using it as much as I thought I was, so you know what to go back and look at. Just showing me a bar saying you were the weakest healer over the fight, it's not really telling me other than I need to be a better healer. It's not telling me how or where or what am I not using.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, for healing too, looking at and again, that Brackenspore fight was the one I studied the most, because that's when I kind of discovered it and kind of like, oh, let's dig into this thing. What it can show you, kind of dovetailing what you said, is when did I it's usually really easy to pick out your spikes in performance, right? So it's like, okay, let me graph myself. It's like, oh wow, my throughput was great here, and you would probably remember, okay, that's where I really threw my big cooldowns, right? Mm-hmm. But you take that little instance and you kind of say, okay, let me layer this up, and that's what I did here. I don't know if you're kind of showing the screen or not.
I'm watching. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so on that fight, what I did was I layered out the entire healing team for that fight. And what nicely does is kind of lays out the graph of healing done over the course of the fight, and I can kind of see, okay, well, I spiked here and here. Ranhar had these peaks, early on in mid-fight, while I was like a third in and then towards the end. And then what was interesting is, okay, well, we're both Resto Shamans, and we seem to have much more of a burst healing pattern, right? Those two blue lines.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Amenable and Lorison in there, in Hemo. They have a much less spikiness to it, right? Less
Right.
variability, but much more of a nice kind of kind of what I think of as a baseline. So it's interesting to see the mix of healers in there and kind of what they're contributing throughout the course of the fight. And it's sort of like, okay, well, that gives me a different appreciation of the different classes. And I don't know yet whether I'm going to see the same sort of pattern, right, over different fights with the same combination of, well, certain classes will give us a nice baseline, kind of even, sort of healing base throughout the fight, and then, kind of spiking, or, so anyways, that's just part of the process, and we can kind of see, well, where are we doubling up? So when you drill down into your personal perspective, you can look at per spell and say, okay, well, I fired off this spell, how much healing did I get from it? How much was lost overhealing? Okay, why was there, if it's really high in overhealing, why did that happen? So I can go back and look at, okay, when did I pop that? And what else was going on with the other healers at the time? And you probably well find is that someone else was going big, right, at maybe the exact same time. And that tells me, okay, then there might be some points along the fight where we can better communicate and coordinate our big cooldowns so we don't lose as much, right, to overhealing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just an example of kind of going in and trying to make sense of what, the data is suggesting and what it can teach.
Right, because when you don't, all you know is you did this overall.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It helps to go back and see that, okay, this was this, and although Recount is really good, it's like I would look at the charts and everything in Recount, and I would just be, okay, because
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't very saying you did this then. It would just say 50% of your spells was this.
Yep.
Instead of saying, when did I do that?
Yep.
That kind of thing. But thank you.
Yeah, it shows your numbers, but it doesn't tell you why. Like it shows what your total healing or DPS is, but not why or what actions. Well, I mean, it does have some of the actions, but.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if I know at the beginning it showed like for the average eye level of the raid how the performance was compared to other raiding groups with that eye level, but does it show for like individuals?
It does for individual. What it is you have to put yourself into the group. First of all, what it does is it breaks down here. It says, is it good for our gear in the breakout here? And what it is that once you have your person selected, it'll tell you what it is. And I don't want to pick anybody because I haven't got anyone's permission to showcase their stuff. But if I go ahead and I click on myself,
you can pick any of them. You can pick me if you want. It's all right.
Well, you're a heal. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, fine. We'll go ahead and pick Ranhar here. So basically, what we look at is see Ranhar's already double checked. So that's why he was like, yeah. He's like, show me, sweet.
Oh yeah.
It's a good fight for me.
But this is what. And so if you look at Ranhar here, you can see how much healing he did, and then so he did better than the raid. Is it good healing? And so what it means, if you read over here, is the percent of players you outperform. So again, the reference is to the total data set that Ask Mr. Robot has. So that's what they're looking at in there. Is that good healing? But is it good for our gear? Answers Cam's question, which is looking at based on your gear, where should your healing be at? Again, based on the aggregate data that Master Robot has pulled. And so you can see here for Ranhar, he's hitting 78%. The other Resto Shamans that are here within that 655 to 662, it's not specific, so it doesn't get that granular.
Within a small range.
Exactly. So, but it does give you a little bit smaller range than just saying, like, when you look at the generic simulations for your level, it gives you a little bit more breakout that's here. So this is what you see here, broken out. And you can see based on our this aspect, Ranhar did perform there better than some of the other healers. So that's what you're looking at here. So it does give you a little bit of that breakout there. Nada said that we can go ahead and look at him. So we'll go ahead and pull up. Gotta be careful.
I don't think it accounts too much for overhealing there, so
No, it doesn't. Yeah, I think it's just to go ahead and just pull it through. So this is what you see.
Right. But I love the graph. I pulled up just the butcher fight and looked at the frenzy phase, and you can actually see where, I kind of regained some mana and was able to pop a big heal at the end while the other healers were kind of picking up the slack for me before that. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that mana check box there is really handy. I mean, especially, we're still somewhat, well, everyone except maybe Hemo is still challenged with mana management for some of these longer fights. So it was really interesting to see because, again, you can kind of flip through the individual views for everyone. You check off the mana box, and you kind of see how different people have different patterns for their mana drain. So, for me, again, it's kind of like going back and saying, okay, well, if this person has a very different pattern than mine, and especially if it looks more favorable, like they're able to maintain their mana or regen it faster, I want to go back and figure out what they're doing. Is it, how they're glyphed? Is it their gear? Or is it their sequence or their rotation of spells that's allowing them to regain? So I'd be going back and kind of digging through. It's like, okay, what is this person doing that's a little bit different that might affect their mana regen in this way?
Exactly, and those are the different things that you can look at playing. I mean, as you guys already said before, it gives you a good look at how the group as a whole is looking at, and this is different things you're peeking around at and checking out.
Also kind of shows me how terrible Resurgence is. My God, I get like no mana back from that. I got more back from a mana pot than I do from Resurgence. I can't believe that.
Yeah, there's certain things that ended up surprising me too. Like I said before, it's like, well, I thought I was doing this for this reason and getting this result, but this really kind of gives you some really solid feedback about whether you're, whether it's happening to expectation or something else very different's going on. And if it's very different, it can cause you really to have to rethink, Like right now, a bigger part of my learning curve, less of a fine-tuning. I think with healing, I feel like I'm at a point where I'm fine-tuning things. So a comparison is really kind of looking at, sort of fine-tuned differences in roles. For me, the DPS side is much more of a active learning curve for me. I feel like I'm much earlier in my knowledge development as a damage thrower. So I'm really going through and kind of comparing, okay, well, in this case, usually it's Jokori, who's the other elemental chamois. What's Jokori throwing around? What's she throwing during the bloodlust phase? What kind of throughput did she get on that particular spell, and why? And it's having, I've already from our last few fights had to really kind of reconsider some of my rotation, based on that. So I'll be, trying some new things. Not showing favor to a certain kind of spell and trying to do a certain other combination instead to see if I can get some better throughput on the damage.
Exactly, and we did have one question about should we use this instead of Recount? Should we use it with Recount? The answer really is to go ahead and use this with Recount. Recount does a really good job of giving you a lot faster real-time data. And the reason is because, quite frankly, Ask Mr. Robot's piece is limited just to the Warlords of Draenor raids that are out now.
Right.
So it'll only work for Highmaul and Blackrock Foundry. So it won't work for anything else. But Recount is really good for when you're working on your rotation and trying to figure that out. I mean, so you're going to use both of them. The nice thing about this is sort of what Shemai and Ranhar have been talking about is really sort of it gives you a good look at what are you doing, what is everyone else doing while you're doing your thing. And you can also look and see, well, wait a minute, I noticed that sort of what we already heard today, where, oh, I noticed that I peak at this certain time whenever I go big or whenever I pop my cooldowns. But if someone else is popping, is it something where you want to stagger those different dots? Because that's the other thing about it is, as you can see, whenever the most intense part of the damaging is, you obviously want to have your heals peak during that time or slightly after. Is usually the most common sight that you see. Because with healing, there's no use for you to go ahead and pre-heal, except because it's not like it's Malachork where everyone gets a shield from your healing. But but some classes there is an advantage, like Pallies. Pallies, when they overheal, portion of their overheal goes to giving everyone a shield. So those are different things. So each type of group, each healer is going to have a little bit different way of doing things, and this graph gives a really good way to look at the different types of healers that we have and finding what works for everybody and trying to keep that overall consistent line of healing. I mean, you can see that even with all these charts, you can see there's a trend line of the healing. You're seeing that baseline where we can peak off, where people can peak off of it. So, I mean, and that's what you're looking for. And DPS is much the same way as healing. You want a high, consistent baseline DPS, and with peaks that you expect to have peaks with different players because they're going to be popping cooldowns at different times. Because some people might have a 3-minute cooldown, whereas other classes might have a 2-minute cooldown. So, those are things you're playing around with and figuring out what makes the most sense of when to hit that and where. But again, this just gives you more ways to play around with it, more things to look at and consider, and we're definitely happy to. I'm sure all of us will be happy to talk about this more as we get more and more things coming out.
Yeah, and I think thinking of R&D especially. I mean, we always hit a point where there's always the active fight, right? So we're trying to progress through this new series of bosses, and I think this is going to be a really great tool that'll help us to kind of get in there and sort of do a real analysis of a particular fight. Like Brackenspore right now is really front and center for me, and trying to dig through and trying to figure out what's our mechanic and how can you improve it, because I feel like we're like right on the cusp. And so a tool like this that gives us the ability to kind of look at it in the aggregate, but also drill down and kind of say, okay, well, here are the general patterns. What does that think, from our experience in the fights and kind of what we've built up in terms of our knowledge of this fight so far, how do we make sense of this data, and where does the data show us, where we can really kind of, improve our performance in the 3 main areas to make it that last stretch, right, where you finish the fight and Brackenspore's down. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to digging into this more, especially as a group, and seeing what we can do to figure out Brackenspore.
All right, everyone. Thanks for watching, and thanks everybody for coming. So we'll continue this conversation in our community as well. So we'll see you guys in game, and definitely, I think, Shemai, I agree with you. We'll definitely be looking at this at future bosses. So we'll just have to figure out. We'll have to be like, okay, so that'll become our new pre-start checklist. Everybody have their add-on on to record this.
Yeah. Well, we get a chance to, we talked about this just a little bit, but get a chance to kind of review the tape, right? Review the game tape and really kind of talk about, and analyze what's going on. I think that's really going to help us with our coordination and, figure out our strategy.
I think it will. These are all nice pieces to look at, and again, benchmarking is always a good thing. It's kind of difficult because, I mean, really, this is one of the first products out there that does address the issue of, it's nice to have analytics, but analytics without reference doesn't give you anything. So this does give you. They do a really good job here of giving everybody a reference point to work off of and to improve. And like I said, we're all here to try to help everyone improve. So we'll see everybody in game. And thanks for watching, everyone. Bye.